Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
You know, it's always been my dream that the party gets rid of the broccoli and has a ladder as its symbol.
It's not an oak tree, it's not broccoli, is it?
Well, it's meant to be a tree, but it looks like broccoli, I think.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, recorded at my favourite pub, a stone's throw from the gates of the Houses of Parliament. Weekly, I bring you the best guests, gossip and stories from around my favourite pub table in the heart of Westminster. This week, we've got two guests. Later, I'll be speaking to Mark Littlewood about a growing force in centre-right politics, popular conservatism, and why it might have a major role in deciding who becomes the next Conservative Party leader. But first, the number of MPs, Tory MPs, quitting Parliament at the next election is growing by the week. Few attract the generous notices of my first guest, Robert Halfon, when he said he was quitting, but then few are as interesting as Robert. Who else will explain their choice of standing down by quoting from the Lord of the Rings? Robert Halfon, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Hello.
Which character in Lord of the Rings would you be?
Oh, well, without a doubt, Bilbo Baggins. And I'll tell you why. One, I'm quite small in stature. I've got very, very fat feet, so my shoes are always...
Are they hairy toes?
Not hairy, but very fat. So they're always 2 sizes too big because they're so fat, because usually shoes are very narrow.
Yes.
And I walk with a stick like Bilbo did. I do smoke. I know it's a terrible thing. I love the countryside. Breakfast is one of my favourite meals, and I'm not like an Aragorn type character, but I can lead people and encourage and persuade people in a kind of way.
Aragorn, of course, became a king eventually.
Yes, Aragorn became a king and was an incredible man, and he was sort of like a, great commander, leader. Whereas Bilbo could lead people and motivate people, but in a very, very different way. And so I think that I'm definitely Bilbo Baggins, without a doubt.
So when you came into politics in 2010, did you ever think you'd be leaving now in 2014? What was your game plan? A lot of your colleagues I meet tell me, that they've got a chance of being Prime Minister. That's what drives them to be it. Do you want to ever be king?
Not in a million years. I think you need to know where your talents are in politics. I always wanted to do something on skills and education. That was my passion. I wasn't desperate for government jobs. Although I did love the party, and I was, proud to be deputy chairman some years ago, and I attended cabinet for a year during the referendum year, which was an incredible thing.
2015, 2016, under David Cameron, you were deputy
under
chairman.
David Cameron in cabinet, and I'll never forget that for the rest of my life, because that was historic. The cabinet meetings that were discussing the referendum.
You were a Remainer.
I was a reluctant Remainer.
Yeah, but a Remainer.
I was a Remainer. I wish I could have put 6 out of 10 on the ballot form. But I absolutely felt in every part of my bones that once it happened, you had to do everything possible to make Brexit happen. And I really was upset at the time by some of the antics that went on to try and stop the result.
Because you're a Democrat?
Well, a passionate Democrat. And all my constituents, 68% who voted for Leave, even though they knew that I voted the other way, they respected the fact that I respected their decision.
Has your career been held back by your principles, in the sense that you've been a rebel when you have to be on, say, free school meals, when Boris Johnson was just in as Prime Minister, when he was trying to think about the election, think about a new team, and you're being a pain at the arse, basically, in House of Commons?
Well, I was Select Committee Chair of the Education Committee. That was an incredible job, because I love campaigning, and that will, God willing, it'll be a long time to come, but on my gravestone, I would love it to say he was a campaigner, hopefully many, many years to come. But I had to, that was, it wasn't about free school meals for all time. It was particularly during COVID. And I just thought the government policy at the time was bonkers. And, the government had spent billions on furlough, and then we're quibbling about a relatively small amount of money on free school meals.
On principle almost, wasn't it?
It was on principle, yes. Yeah. And I wrote an article for The Spectator saying the Conservative case for free school meals during COVID, which I think actually in all my time is probably the best article I've ever written. But of course, then the government did change the policy after all the aggro, most MPs voting against free school meals, and then they changed the policy.
So you're right.
Well, let's put it this way: it was the right thing to do. I remember Nikki DaCosta in Number 10, who's a great person, ringing me up saying they were going to change the policy, and they realised they'd got it wrong. I had massive respect for at least the government admitting that, but it doesn't help, of course, when you do. And that time I rebelled quite a bit.
What's been your greatest achievement in politics?
Well, I focused on three things in politics. One was, of course, the cost of living, and that manifested itself in campaigning for the minimum wage, which Osborne did. I was really pleased, but most
Tories
importantly,
opposed initially,
yeah,
and then came round under the Lib Dems, and now support it.
passionate. Well, that's why I'm a huge fan of George Osborne. And no offence to your brilliant podcast, but I also listen to his regularly.
With Ed Balls.
It
is very good.
It's brilliant.
I mean, and they talk from a position of being in the room, which I'm not in the room. So it's a different podcast.
I was his parliamentary private secretary for a year, and he was incredible. I mean, he's a brilliant strategist. As it happens, PPSs are called bag carriers.
Yes.
So he used to help me carry my briefcase. So I think I was the first PPS in history where the Secretary of State carries the bag of the PPS rather than the other way around.
As a parliamentary private secretary, it's an unpaid role, and you basically liaise with MPs, but you sit in the Treasury in that case.
And it was really tough in 2014 to 15 because we had Ed Balls on the warpath in the run-up to the 2015 election. So there were statements, urgent questions in Parliament all the time, and you had to manage all that. But I've had
your achievements, though. I mean,
getting
diversity.
So the key, obviously, on cost of living was minimum wage, but particularly fuel duty.
Well, I'm going to come to that now. On his podcast and elsewhere, he's called you the most expensive Tory backbencher in history because, we should explain why.
Well, the problem with saying that is sometimes my constituents think it's about my expenses, and I know what you're like on MPs' expenses.
No, but you explain what he means.
What they meant was because I campaigned so hard with Fairfield UK and the newspapers to cut fuel duty, and it cost the Treasury billions, or freeze. Well, we actually got one cut initially, then complete freeze for many years, and then 5p from Rishi when he was Chancellor, which people have forgotten about.
Have you worked out the cost of your
it's billions and billions and
You've
billions
cost the
of
government
pounds.
Billions, Robert Halfon.
Well, I would say we've saved the taxpayer billions because I'm a conservative.
Because you're a Tory, I forgot that. Yes, of course.
And it was the most incredible campaign. I remember when we got a petition together with Howard Cox of Fairfield UK, latterly the Reform Party person, sadly, but we got 100,000 signatures like within 10 days or something, and got a petition to Parliament. We did demonstrations, we did everything, and
the Sun newspaper behind you, of course.
Oh, and the Sun was brilliant.
You've been huge on this, and
the Sun was massive, and so it's become a totemic tax that no government dares touch. So I guess when I go, they will. I hope they don't put it up. Let's put it that way. But that was a great achievement, and I got awards for it, and it's been something I'm very proud of. By the way, I started that campaign literally.
Yeah, why?
Because McDonald's in Harlow, one of the McDonald's on the roundabout on the M11, had started charging for parking after an hour. And I said to the...
You need longer for a Big Mac, don't you, in an hour?
Well, exactly. Well, I said to the owner, why are you charging for people parking after an hour? I don't know. He said, because some people are parking overnight because they can't afford to go because of the cost of petrol. And I had so many constituents. And by the way, if you remember when I first got in, the price of petrol was rising and diesel quite highly. And so it was such a cost, not just to motorists, but to employers. It put up the price of food because of transport costs. So I realised this was like the biggest cost of living issue.
And the voice of the motorist is often, I think, missing in policy debate. A lot of people working in Westminster, Whitehall, don't drive, get the train, the tube, and you're someone who's plugged into what your voters are concerned about, which outside of the major transport hubs, you need your car.
Well, I'm a white van conservative, and white van
conservatives... Did you invent that term?
I think so. I always say white van man and women because plenty of women drive white. In fact, we did once with the Sun a white van women manifesto with a white van woman from Harlow. My constituency, which was amazing.
Excellent.
But what I mean by that is that it's small mobile business, entrepreneurial people who sometimes they're just about managing. They hate the ULEZ, for example. But
trying to carry the tools through the barriers.
Yeah, they can't get into London, congestion charging, the cycle lanes, goodness knows what. Everything is against them, and yet these people work really long hours doing everything for their families, and they epitomise kind of the Essex entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, and the seat you're leaving, you got a healthy majority. You don't.
So,
are you losing seat?
No, in fact, the boundary changes. We get some of Kemi Bednock's,
right, Saffron Walden,
Saffron Walden, some villages. But so I've worked really hard. I haven't just championed field duty. I've championed apprenticeships and skills all my parliamentary life. My first speech was
and
on
your
it.
Twitter handle is Halfon for Harlow.
Always, and my email.
And your email.
I've never
which
used
I think says
parliamentary
everything
email.
because you define yourself totally in terms of your constituents. You're not really.
That was from day one, and I've never my email. I don't use parliamentary email. My email is halfonforharlow at roberthalfon.com. My Twitter is Halfon for Harlow because I wanted to show people that I'm championing hard. I love my constituency,
and that's why you get so much respect, if I can say that, because you're rooted in the people you represent.
I love it, and I've lived there since 2000, very early January 2000. But I've done 10 years as a parliamentary candidate in the same place. I lost by 97 votes in 2005.
Before 2010?
Before 21. So in 2001, I cut the majority from 11,000 to 6,000, then lost by 97 votes in 2005. 2010, I won by 4,000 votes. But it's 10 years as a candidate, 14 years as an MP.
25 years of
25 years this November.
battling.
So I was selected originally in November 1999. And, in a seat like that, it's amazing, but you have to work 7 days a week, and which I love doing. I'm not complaining about it, but they want you to work hard. And also, you've always got the Labour Party on your heels. The Labour Party are very strong, although we've beaten them. We've now run the council only for the third time in political history, in the whole history of Harlow.
But you built a 14,000 majority over 3 elections since 2010.
4 elections.
4 elections.
Yeah.
I had in my head. I missed one.
Yeah.
4 elections since 2010. You built your sandcastle. You built your foundations. Why are you knocking it all down? Because all the effort you put in is there to be seen.
So I wanted to be an MP since I was 10. And because an MP came to my school and said Parliament had 1,000 rooms, and I didn't believe it, and I demanded to go to see every single room. But it's been amazing. But I've just reached a point in my life that I've achieved my lifetime's dream. I attended cabinet. I became an MP for a great town. I attended cabinet. I've been a minister twice, select committee chair. It's time for me. I want to do something different.
While you can.
While I can, And so, it's sometimes you shouldn't overstay your welcome. So I think that it's time for me. I feel it in my bones that it's time for me. I still want to work in skills and education. That's I still want to, obviously support the Conservatives in one way or another, but just not as a member of the House of Commons.
Politics is all about context, and you've got your own personal context. You explain that very clearly. Others think he is the originator of blue-collar conservatism. It's the party moving away from where Labour's strong. But you're a totemic, you're a canary in the mine for some people who watch your party.
I was seen as the original blue-collar MP because apart from Stevenage, I think, me and Stephen Bartlett were pretty unusual seats to win in 2010.
You were the 2 guys who invented it, really, I think.
Yeah.
Stephen Bartlett.
Exactly. And and we actually were both new towns. I think we just need to be very careful what blue-collar conservatism is about. Because I absolutely get the culture issues. I completely get it.
So all the culture wars stuff, in quotes, the issues about lanyards, that's a distraction.
So look, I don't like the term culture wars, and I think Kemi said this, Kemi Badenoch, and some of it is really important. Lanyards, I just don't care. I've worn a Ukraine lanyard and very proud to do so, although I don't wear them very much. Lanyards, I don't like wearing things around, but what we got to be very careful what blue collar conservatism is all about, and what it's about is absolute priorities on the cost of living. So I get constituents saying I'm working 48 hours, I have hardly any money left, even with all the government help, which I support, the £900 tax cut and so on. I get constituents writing to me all the time about affordable housing because people don't even, so much. Most of our population have tiny amount of savings, right? They can't even afford a deposit for a house. So we need affordable housing. In Harlow, Conservative Council, we built social housing. I'm proud of that. And that's why we won, because we've been conservative because we've frozen council tax every year for the last 3 years. and built so affordable housing. And so if you go down an alley, which is a kind of minority pursuit, you're not focusing on real priorities that affect people's everyday lives. Like, will I get a GP appointment in the next few days rather than 2, 3, 4 weeks down the line, right? And I have always tried to focus on the key things that matter, because those are the things that voters are going to make their decision
So why is
on.
your party worrying about this stuff? Is it a Twitter irrelevance?
Some of it is really important, and what Gillian is doing,
Of course, yeah, on sex education.
you know, and all that. But what I would argue is, you know, do the things that are absolutely essential. You know, let great people like J.K. Rowling speak out, but let's focus on cost of living, housing, skills.
And will blue-collar
NHS.
conservatism live on when you're not there? I think also Steve McPartland is quitting as well.
Yeah.
So the two originators of this idea, which have drove maybe the Boris Johnson wins in the so-called red wall, blue wall,
It's fun enough.
is it withering?
I think we've got to be very clear what blue-collar conservatism is all about. And also, again, when people talk about immigration, right, we've got to remember that most people in our country will either have a member of the family who might come from a different background, or a cousin or a friend or whatever it is. And you have to be very careful in the language, because when you keep going on about I want our country back and all this kind of thing, which I really don't like, what you're also saying is to the person who has an Italian wife or a Asian cousin, whatever it might be, well, actually, we don't like those people. And there's millions of people from different backgrounds in our country, in our towns, as much as in our cities, who are maybe from different backgrounds. And we have to be clear, stopping the boats. I completely get it. But the language and the narrative has to be one of compassion.
But you're leaving the field, so you can't shape that debate anymore. Why is that?
Why am I leaving the field?
Well, I know why you're leaving, but you regret. You're concerned about the future of the Tory
Yes,
party,
I am.
but you're leaving the pitch because you're standing now as an MP.
I'm concerned that I don't want us to become a mirror image of the Corbynistas in reverse. I want us to be compassionate conservatives. That doesn't mean left-wing, you know, kind of woke, whatever. But you govern as compassionate conservatives. The language and the narrative and the story, our party must be about aspiration, achievement, opportunity, and community. Very simple words. The ladder of opportunities, I always call it. You know, it's always been my dream that the party gets rid of the broccoli and has a ladder as its symbol, because with hands round it, because we help people climb the ladder. We get them to the top.
It's an oak tree. It's not broccoli, is it?
Well, it's meant to be a tree, but it looks like broccoli. I think.
Have you told the party that?
Many times. I've one of my few.
But you were a former Deputy Party Chairman. You can change this stuff.
Well, it was one of my few things that I've campaigned on that I've been very unsuccessful. I tried to get Nadeem Zahawi, every chairman under the sun, but they, for some reason, I don't get it. It's a terrible symbol. It doesn't look like anything. We are, and Churchill said this. He had the escalator of prosperity.
A ladder.
We bring. What is conservatism about? We bring people to the ladder. We help them climb up rung by rung. You have a safety net if people fall off that ladder, right? What is the top of that ladder? It's job security and prosperity. That's what and so we need to express our values and have a powerful story, because the Labour Party have a story. They say, well, they want to help the underdog.
I've got to ask you about you. Are you disabled, Robert Halfon?
Yes, I was born with a form of cerebral palsy called spastic diplegia. And actually, when I was young, I was told I would never walk. The doctors wrote to my family. I walked on tiptoe, so I could have made a great ballet dancer, perhaps in Covent Garden or something. The doctors said I would never. Wrote to my father saying I would probably need to go to a special school. And then my father found a great professor in Great Ormond Street Hospital who changed my life. So I had many operations throughout my childhood. And here I am, walking up these very stairs. It's like going up in a ship to get to the top floor. But being a minister and being able to doing,
you haven't allowed any of that to hold you back. And do you think of yourself as disabled, or just
no? I don't like the terminology. No. I see myself as my legs being messed up, but I've got advantages than other. I have. I wake up early. I go swimming like a dolphin in the water.
I bet you are. Yeah.
Bizarrely, you would think that I was. That sketch in Little Britain where the guy jumps out of the wheelchair.
Yeah.
That's me in the water. You'd think it was all a big con if you saw me in the water because I could swim so
Rob,
well.
we're going to miss you in Parliament. I've got to say.
Thank you.
I've got to ask you one question. How will you feel when you shake hands and say goodbye to the Speaker?
I'm going to cry.
October. I think you'll cry, won't you?
Yeah.
I've been 4 or 5 of those.
Yeah.
Watch them happen, and it is emotional.
I will cry. I have cold turkey. It will literally be shaking, because politics isn't a job; it's a vocation. It's an addiction, without a doubt.
You're going to wean yourself off it?
Never.
Robert Halfon, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, behind the spires of the Palace of Westminster, there's a battle being fought over the direction of the Tory party if the polls are right and the party does lose the next general election. MPs and supporters are fretting about those poll ratings. Groups are being formed outside the influence or the direct influence of the Conservative Party to shape that direction. One group is called Popular Conservatism. Key figures in that group, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Liz Truss, Lee Anderson, as was before he went to the Reform Party, and others. But with me now is its Chief Executive, Mark Littlewood. Mark, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Great to be with you, Chris.
Just checking, Lee Anderson is now out of Popular Conservatism. Was he allowed to be a member? Because you're not aligned to a party.
We don't actually have a membership. So, if Lee Anderson signs up to receive our weekly email newsletters, he will indeed receive them.
So you're a movement?
Yeah, we are a movement. And
that's a bit of an American thing more than the British thing.
Yeah, we're much more focused on trying to get to grassroots members. There's lots of talk in the media about, I've lost track now, is it 5 families, 6 families? And that's great.
Amongst the Tory MP
That's amongst
groupings.
the Tory MPs. These are sort of dining clubs, or they produce research pamphlets, and that's great. It adds to the gaiety of nations. We're interested in talking to MPs for sure. They're going to be vital on shaping the future agenda of the Conservative Party, but we've got more than an eye on actual grassroots members of the Conservative Party up and down the land.
So it is about the Tory party, not about a new party, because we have heard from other people, Dominic Cummings, Matthew Goodwin, talking about their own parties. But you are basically trying to help the Tory party reshape.
Yeah, my analysis is this, that the extreme likelihood is we're going to remain in a 2-party duopoly, whether the opinion polls are right or not, frankly. I don't see that breaking. It might. It did 100 years ago when the Labour Party broke through. Perhaps the Dom Cummings party or the Matt Goodwin party or some other venture will suddenly march to the sunlit uplands and win hundreds of seats under the first past the post system. But I doubt it. So I really think the main show in town is, what does the Conservative Party do? What's it think? What's it stand for? If you're interested in the centre-right of politics.
Okay. PopCon then, as it's called by some people. What's it? How many members has it got? Subscribers? What do you call them? And what do they do? Are they paying money to be part of this?
No, we haven't charged anybody a bean yet. We might do that in future. We've got about 10,000 people on our database. It's ticking up nicely. We perhaps get a dozen or so sign-ups a day. We offer membership sort of services. You can join me on online conversations, not dissimilar to this one with leading Conservatives. So we're reaching out right across Britain and trying to attract people. Some of them won't be members of the Conservative Party.
Well, how many are of those 10,000
You know what?
members?
That's extremely difficult to actually work out.
Do you ask them?
We ask them. But we can't oblige them to sort of share their membership details with us. Our strong impression from all the feedback we get is the overwhelming majority are. They talk about running in the local council elections, that sort of thing. So we're building it brick by brick. And there aren't too many kind of grassroots Conservative Party organisations. There's a lot within the Westminster bubble.
There's a gang called Grassroots Conservatives from memory.
Is that right?
Which isn't, quite. It's not that
I haven't come. There's the CDO, of course, the Conservative Democratic Organisation.
It's a Boris Johnsonite gang.
Well, it has a mixture of things. I think they miss Boris, but they're principally aimed at changing the party's kind of constitutions and rules. We're aimed actually at trying to shift the party's philosophy and platform.
So what is this 70-70-70 strategy, which I think you'd be speaking to financial supporters about, and it may have leaked to newspapers.
Yeah, I'm not surprised it's leaked to newspapers because I'm speaking to absolutely anybody about it who will listen, right?
Well, tell our podcast about it.
So look, if you want to shape the future of the Conservative Party, at some point there'll be a leadership election. We can speculate, whether the Conservative Party will win or lose the next election and all of that sort of stuff. But at some point there'll be a leadership election, and that really will define the future of the Conservative Party, its platform, whenever that comes. And one of my 70s is actually out of date because my projection was, were the Conservatives to lose the election, it would be about 70 weeks until there was a leadership election. And I was saying that in about October or November. Were we to lose, I don't completely rule out something miracle could happen.
So 70 weeks.
You've got 70 weeks probably until there's a Conservative leadership election. Depending on how many Conservative MPs you think will be standing after the election, but the kind of midpoint of the opinion polls, I think it was certainly at the time around 200 or so, a leadership candidate needs just over a third of the parliamentary party to get on the ballot. If you get 33.4%, there are not two candidates who can beat you, and the parliamentary party puts two candidates forward, so that's would be 70 MPs. If you presume 210 seats, maybe it will be 310, maybe it will be lower. Yeah. And amongst the membership, there were around about 160,000 members of the Conservative Party.
70.
And yeah, not everybody votes. I think when Liz Truss won, she won comfortably with, I think, 82,000 votes.
Okay.
So you probably need 70,000 voters.
So it's more like 40, 70, because it's less time to the leadership election if the Tories lose the election.
Well, I've heard all sorts of numbers fired back at me. Some people think the Conservatives will do far worse in the election, so you might not need 70 MPs. But that's the rough structure. It's not a sort of secret strategy.
And you're developing a policy platform with your 10,000 supporters, which you'll then present to possible candidates in the election and say, which of you like this, then we can then get behind you.
That's exactly right. I mean, I don't have a candidate in mind. For people who've been around this block for donkey's years like you and I, you'll remember when Michael Portillo sort of preemptively set up his campaign headquarters and started installing phone lines. And I genuinely don't know.
That wouldn't happen now because everyone's on mobile phones.
Everybody's on mobile
there's no
phones.
Clue.
But you start to, I mean, there's been all of these rumours about some cohort that was trying to get rid of Rishi Sunak meeting in some office in Macon. I genuinely don't have a candidate.
He's safe now, isn't he?
Yeah. And
I mean, come on, he's not going to be challenged for the election.
I think it was ludicrous to suggest we should remove the Prime Minister. I genuinely did. I could not believe that would be in the best party's interest. And I wish him well at the election, right? I mean, he might be 25% behind, but he'll definitely be getting my vote. And I think that manoeuvring against him was mad. So I don't have a candidate in mind. We can talk about a range of the personalities, but I want a candidate who will pick up the philosophy and platform of what PopCon are saying.
Which is?
Now, the overarching thing is this, and I'm going to be honest, this doesn't actually sit perfectly well with a Conservative mindset. Rather than working with the grain of a lot of the institutions in the UK, we've got to tear up a lot of institutions in the UK. The typical Conservative mindset is always, oh, well, if it's here and it exists, and that's probably the wisdom of the ages.
Yeah, you can serve what's been in the past.
That's the typical mindset. I now think, and we think in PopCon, that the institutional infrastructure is enormously geared against Conservative ends. The Climate Change Committee, I would suggest, has more influence over climate policy than the Secretary of State for the Environment.
And one's elected and one isn't.
Yeah, one's elected and one isn't. The OBR, I think now,
again,
basically
sets one isn't.
Fiscal policy more than the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So it goes on. I think the Bank of England is not sufficiently answerable to our democratically elected Parliament. Wherever you look, I think an awful lot of stuff that's happening in our schools that parents are uneasy about is not really because of a choice made by Parliament.
Mark, there's one problem with this. The elected people can change those unelected institutions. They can get rid of the OBR. They can wind up the Climate Change Committee. Right. Why aren't they?
Well, exactly. I mean, our argument is they should. I mean, if they couldn't, my venture would be entirely pointless, right? I mean, we want a government that will rid that.
So you're trying to find MPs and candidates who will do that for
Correct. That would be the platform, that there's going to be a real institutional kind of reset or restoration. And I think roughly what happened was this. When the Conservatives came to office in coalition with the Lib Dems back in 2010, there was, I mean, it was unsaid, but essentially, given that Blair had accepted the Thatcherite economic settlement, Cameron accepted the Blairite constitutional settlement. So a vast range of these quangos and institutions and supposed independent bodies, a theme and a description in the media which I loathe, because independent is basically a word meaning unaccountable. Independent of what? I don't want all of these things to be independent.
It implies that MPs can't be trusted.
Yeah.
MPC set up by Gordon Brown was because the feeling was that you can't trust politicians with the key part of setting the interest rates.
That's exactly right. So we've got a problem. I mean, I'm not suggesting we completely renationalise the Bank of England, by the way, but I think we've got a problem, without wanting to overstate this, that elected politicians have become, to some degree, ceremonial. The big decisions about what happens in policy making are taken by these independent experts and quangos and the rest, and that needs to be reset.
I can hear people shouting into their phones or into their speakers in their kitchens when they're hearing this podcast. They'll say, this was tried by someone before, and that person was Liz Truss, and it went wrong. So why are you trying to go down that same route?
Well, I actually don't think it was tried by Liz Truss. I mean, she didn't abolish the Office for Public Responsibility. She sacked one senior civil servant,
Tom Scholar from the Treasury.
There was no change to the Bank of England. Actually, the Truss experience over 49 days, but I would suggest the Conservative experience over 14 years, is trying to do the policy things like lowering tax, cutting regulation, reforming planning, changing our immigration policy. These become nearly impossible to implement these policies because you are pushing water uphill against an institutional framework which is frankly hostile to you. I think if Truss had actually won a general election and had come in with a public mandate, actually she probably would have started on reforming these things, and the civil service I would add to that list as well. I think the lesson was, if you try to do these things, you can't.
So what's next from PopCon? We've had one of your biggest celebrity supporters, Holly Valance, sitting in the same chair you were in just now as my first guest on this podcast a few weeks ago. What's next? Will she'll be the standard bearer, and will you be producing a policy platform pre-election?
She'd need to become an MP before she could run for leader of the Conservative Party, Chris, but interesting outside bet. Yeah, we want to produce a policy platform and flesh out these ideas, because I'm conscious they're a bit nebulous. If you go out onto the street and say, what do we need? Institutional change to the quangocracy, when do we need it now?
So a pledge card coming up.
So, I mean, there's 4 areas in particular. I think we need to leave the ECHR in order to have a coherent immigration policy. I think we need to scrap the Equality Act in order to properly tackle the invasive woke culture. I think we need to scrap the OBR in order to actually have a sensible tax and spend policy. And I think we need to scrap the Climate Change Committee and retreat from the commitment of carbon.
That's 3 out of 4 new Labour policies, and one being a Tory, one the OBR.
Yeah, I mean, that I think would be a radical and popular Conservative platform. Whether we can get any of that into the manifesto, I don't know.
Are you in talks now with the party?
Yeah, we're going to put all of this together, try and get it into the manifesto. Some of what we're looking at is because of where the polls are, what might happen afterwards, but you fight politics one day at a time. And at the moment, we're still in government, and the Conservative Party will put a manifesto forward to the people.
Well, Mark Littlewood, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. It's great to have you on to hear about PopCon, and let's see how it develops.
It's great to be with you, Chris.
Thanks to my guests today, Mark Littlewood and, of course, Robert Halfon earlier. I'd love to know your thoughts about what you heard from Mark and Robert. Tweet me, Christopher Hope, on X. Email me, chopper@gbnews.uk. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I know Mark has, please tell your friends. And if you really enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and anywhere where you hear your podcasts. That helps other people find it more easily. Thank the brilliant team at GB News behind this podcast, a cast of thousands: Mick Booker, Jeff Marsh, Rebecca Nunes, George McMillan, Emil Kunda, Ollie Costello, many more. And thank you for listening. And if you want more Chopper in your life, and frankly, who doesn't, catch me during the week on GB News, popping up with political reporting and analysis, and at midday on Wednesdays with our programme PMQs Live. Keep up to date with all the best political reporting on our website, gbnews.com. But until next time, from my favourite pub table, cheerio!